Good morning and welcome to the third webinar in the Lodi Rules Management Plan workshop series. Thank you all so much for joining us. It looks like we have about 10 of you this morning on this webinar. And in case you missed the first two webinars on the failed chapter management plans, the soil conservation plan, or the water management plan, you can find those at lodigrowers.com under the Education, Videos, Presentations, and Handouts tab. And that's also where these handouts that we show you as we share our screen are located. So thank you for your participation this morning. Today you have myself, Stephanie Bolton, the Lodi Rules Sustainable Wine Growing Director, as well as Lee Caton. And Lee, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. My name's Lee Caton. I've been part of the Lodi Rules Committee. So we're good. Okay, little pause there. I've been part of the program with some of our vineyards for the last 6 years now. And so I've been through audit processes, and I have some helpful tips today that have helped me get through that.
So that was Lee Caton. I think we thought we were already recording, or already live, but apparently maybe we were not. So sorry if we're repeating ourselves, but thank you for coming today. Welcome to today's Lodi Rules Management Plan webinar, the third webinar in a series of 4 webinars on management plans. And in case you missed other webinars that we've already had this month, they are available at lodigrowers.com under the Education, Videos, Presentations, and Handouts tab. So if you have any feedback as to how the webinars are going, or if you want more for the next webinar, what works, what doesn't work, let us know. Stephanie at lodiwine.com is the email address for those comments. And as a general reminder, please be sure that you're reading the introductory material in your Lodi Rules Standards binder. That's pages 1 through 6. It really explains a lot about the standards and about which person to contact with questions. Our program is third-party accredited and third-party audited and peer-reviewed, so there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of different people. We have protected harvest as well as your auditor, and we want to be sure that you know who to contact with what questions, and that's on page 6 in your binder. And also to prepare for your audit, which is coming up shortly, use the audit prep checklist, which is tab 10 in your binder, and it's also available at lodirules.com. So if after reading the audit prep checklist you're still kind of unsure as to whether or not something counts as a verification document, then you would contact Heather Muser. And then if your grape buyer has strong ties to the Lodi Rules program, you might also want to contact them because they will probably be willing to spend some time helping you through the program if it's your first year. So again, your hosts today are myself, Stephanie Bolton, and Lee Caton here. Thank you so much, Lee. Really appreciate it. And today we'll be covering 3 management plans and monitoring records. So we will be covering the insect and mite pest management plan, the monitoring records, powdery mildew management plan, and soil-borne pest management plan. And there will be a few more management plans from chapter 6 that we'll cover later this month. So we're going to start out with some general tips. This is your first year in the Lodi Rules program. Keep your plans simple. They do not have to be 10-page plans that are in ridiculous amounts of detail. They can be very simple. And make sure that you add the corresponding Lodi Rules standard and title at the top of each plan for easy filing and organization. You want to be sure that you follow kind of a general organization for each of your plans. So Lee was showing me all of his plans earlier, and they all start out listing visions and goals, describing the current situation in as much detail as is needed, and then you list your overall management strategies, and of course you always have your plan review and update schedule at the end. Use the headings in the standard itself, and what I mean by the headings are these key terms that are in the standard. So use those headings to organize the plan around those. And I'll show you some examples of that. And if you haven't written anything longer than an email in several years, don't worry. I talked to Heather Muser and she said that bullet points work just as well. Always include a section at the end of the plan for a plan review and update with lines for dates and signatures. And then review your management plans at your annual managers meeting, which is Lodi Rules Standard 1.3. And then if you want to improve over time, it's been suggested by the Lodi Rules Committee that every year you focus on one area to improve for each plan, or maybe you focus on a few plans to really make them better. And we want to remind you that we want these plans to be workable and usable. So share your plans with your employees and ask for input. Employee retention is growing harder and harder. It's difficult and important these days, and you'll really be surprised at how effective creating a teamwork environment is at employee satisfaction. So get people involved in your plans once you've created the basic organization of them.
So one of the tips that I was sharing with Stephanie is in our first year in getting prepared for the audit, what I found is organizing things in whatever way makes the most sense for you. So what I've done is for each management unit, so in our case, I do by variety and then also by ranch location, I have put together binders. And these binders have different tabs. So on the tab, in corresponding with the chapter, you'll have, as an example, 6-1, which was your insect and mite management plan. I have a tab in my binder with 6-1, and then I have in this binder, I go to that tab, so that during the audit process, it's very easy for you to go find a specific item. In my past audits, they don't necessarily go through every single standard. They may ask you, let me see your insect management plan. So you'll go to that number, and then they may ask for you specific things like show me your monitoring. So then you can flip to that one. So they don't have the time typically to go through every single standard, but they want to see that you're organized, and that makes it go a lot smoother. So that's something that's been helpful for me, and maybe that would be helpful for you. I know others have done it on a laptop, and they have everything digital, and so they can quickly scroll through. The worst thing that you would do, in my opinion, was have to hunt around during the audit process. And the auditor doesn't have much time, if you imagine. They don't want you to be going through files and trying to find your training records or other things that you have. If you have everything all together, it makes it go a lot smoother, in my opinion. So our plan that we have in place, I go through and I review it every year, and I'll just initial it at the top. That's something that's worked for us in the past. The auditor wants to see that you didn't create the plan the first year and then just walk away from it. So there are times where things maybe be changed, and you want to change as you go. So you want to leave that initialing has been suffice for us in putting the current date. Again, all the plans, keep them general. You want to have goals. So you're going to have your goals. And so on our insect and pest management plan, we would have things as an example. Control vine stress, limit dust in the vineyard in regards to mites. You know, other examples that we have here, like we talked about, keep it simple. You may have other things in here. Consider natural enemies. You have avoiding resistance through different insecticides that you're using. So whatever goal it is for your vineyard, if you want to have a pest-free vineyard, if you want to have a certain threshold that has worked for you in the past, go ahead and put it in the plan. And then after your goals, you'll have strategy. So how are you going to accomplish your goals? So a strategy can be that I'm going to monitor once a week, every 7 days. You could say I'm going to monitor every 10 days, every 14 days. Whatever that you intend to do, make that part of your plan. You could have items in here, other items as I'm going to train my employees. Your employees, as we know, are normally with things like vine mealybug, those are going to be the people that are going to find it oftentimes quicker than your pest control advisor or even yourself, because they're out there, they're touching the vines, whether it's pruning time, leafing, or what you may do in the vineyard during that time. Then the next part is you'll have thresholds. And so we're taking all these things, like Stephanie said, from the bullet points that we have listed in the what's this document?
Standard binder.
Yeah, in the standard binder. And so you have thresholds. And so in our case, we have, if we see more than 15 or 20 mites, as an example, then we're going to take note of that, and then we're going to have a treatment action. You could have items in there. Well, how many leaves are you going to pull per vine? How many vines per field are you going to analyze? And then you'll do the same thing for mites. And so you can have very general things, you can get elaborate. It's really up to your own opinion. And then the final that we have on every plan is we always have the review process, an updating process, what worked, what we may want to change with the next year. And then there's always a code in here for you can have new insects. When this was first created, we weren't talking as much about vine mealybug as an example as we are now. So those are other insects that will come about over the years if you continue with the program that you may want to list under insects. So that's what we try to do. And then once your plan is in place, you know, typically you won't have a lot of changes going forward. So it is cumbersome, I realize, and so keeping it simple is a great tip from Stephanie. You can always add to this plan in future years. And so don't think that you have to spend, I mean, it could be a paragraph, it can be 10 bullet points, it can be whatever is comfortable with you and you want to.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Lee. It really helps to have these real examples to show, and Lee has a fantastic binder. Okay, so we're going to take our video off now and continue with the insect and mite pest management plan. So we're just going to, the way we do this is we'll just read you the standard that goes along with the plan, and then we'll show you an example. So 6.1, the farming operation has a written and implemented insect and mite pest management plan containing the following components: goals, guidelines for written monitoring records, frequency and location of monitoring, action and economic thresholds for each pest based on pest numbers, natural enemy type, number considerations, amount of leaf and or fruit damage present, time of year, canopy vigor, wine grape variety, timing of treatments, and a plan review and update schedule. And so just as a reminder, in your binder, following every standard is what we call companion information. And that companion information includes the scope, the purpose, the verification, the references, and then for management plans, it also includes plan organization tips. So if you've only been going off your online self-assessment, you might have missed some of this companion information. So that's why we spend a lot of time printing off those hundreds of Lodi Rules standards binders, is because there's some extra information for you in there. So don't forget about that too. So here's a general example. Lodi Rules 6.1, Insect and Mite Pest Management Plan. Again, we have the title at the top. And like Lee said, you want to keep track of when the plan is updated and also probably when it was written. So here, just at the top, we have it was written on January 13th, 2014, and then it was last updated on March 10th of this year. And this is just an example. And a lot of people choose to put their logo somewhere on their management plans because they end up being quite proud of them. Mm-hmm. So at the top we have our goals. So we strive to make wise, environmentally conscious, socially responsible, and economically feasible pest treatment decisions that our operation is proud of. We utilize integrated pest management tools such as biocontrol, dust control, and sanitation in conjunction with plant protectants, and annually evaluate pest management decisions and new options for pest control. We pay close attention to emerging and invasive pests, follow label instructions, rotate chemistries, and employ non-chemical control as efforts to reduce resistance buildup in pathogen populations. Can you tell that I was a plant pathology doctor there? Employees are trained in recognition of both pests and beneficial insects. When possible, spot treatments are used. And these goals, I just wrote up last night as an example, so feel free to take these goals and rewrite them. Please don't just copy and paste them into your plan, but you are welcome to use them as a guide and change them into your own words. So guidelines for written monitoring records, and again, we're just copying these headings from the standard itself. So the PCA monitors the vineyard for insect and mite pests at least once every 10 days during the growing season, May through harvest, and keeps written records which are then transferred to us via email upon request. And that those written records correspond with Lodi Rules Standard 6.2. Vineyards are monitored in a systematic way to include the edges as well as several different locations within the block, Pacific spider mites and leafhoppers are occasionally an issue, as are vine mealybugs.
I was just going to add that make sure whatever specifics that you put into this plan or goals are also being carried through. So if you're going to monitor once a week or every 2 weeks, then you want to make specific what you're doing, because there are other standards, as we know, that you get points depending on how frequently that you go in. So you may want to leave this open-ended, or you may want to put a specific date that you intend to go out there. But we all know that saying every week may not be possible, so you could put words as at least every 2 weeks. You could put, you know, you can leave it a little bit more general so you're not very specific, is what's been helpful for me.
Exactly, and that's a good reminder, Lee. So you want to make sure that whatever you say you're doing in your plan, you are actually doing when it comes time for verification. So then the plan wants you to have some action and economic thresholds for the insect or mite pest that you have chosen as important enough to write into your plan. And I want to stress that these are only examples. Do not use these as pest control guidance. So here's one way to do your action and economic thresholds for leafhoppers. So less than 2 nymphs per leaf. So we have metrics, right? We have a way of measuring a level, and no leaf damage. That gets no treatment. Between 2 to 5 nymphs per leaf, low leaf damage, low adult population present. In that case, we're going to monitor. So we're going to watch the low vigor varieties more closely since they have less leaves also. And then if we see that there's moderate to heavy leaf damage and moderate to heavy adult populations present, we're going to treat. And notice that you don't have to say how you're going to treat necessarily. You can just say that we will treat. And then if there's greater than 5 nymphs per leaf, we also treat. So that's just one example with leafhoppers, and you know every single operation is going to have something different. Leaves says something different.
So on our thresholds are actually quite a bit higher. These numbers that we're looking at came from table grapes, and so table grapes, you know, they can't have as much of a leafhopper infestation than we typically can with wine grapes. So an example, you know, we have 15 to 20 leaves, and so you know you can, whatever your experience has shown you. You can put different thresholds. As long as you establish the threshold and you monitor based and treat upon that, you can come up with whatever number you would like. You could put even larger numbers than that. So you know in general kind of numbers that work for you. What they're after is they want to make sure that you have a plan in place and that you're also monitoring and then you're reacting depending on your monitoring results. Exactly. So the leafhoppers and the mites are ones that specifically that we need to track and have these thresholds established. For other insects, you know, that's up to the person or whatever other insects they may have in their vineyard, and it could be a presence absence. It could be you know, vine mealybug is one. It could be you know, other worm damage that you may have, and that's specific to your site. But you definitely want to cover the leafhoppers and the mites in your plan as a minimum.
So the next one is the action and economic thresholds for spider mites. Less than 50% of leaves are infested with mites. In that case, here's more detailed responses. So in that case, the action is to release predatory mites to keep the population under control. Then when there's 50 to 70% of leaves infested with mites, the treatment or the reaction is if predatory mite populations are on the rise, monitor. If not, treat with a biocontrol friendly product. And in this case, we were saying avoid Fujimite and Nectar and use Acromite or Nealta because they're more biocontrol friendly according to this example. And then greater than 70% of leaves infested with mites, in that case, you would want to, for this grower, you'd want to treat with a biocontrol friendly product. So this is another example. And then vine mealybug is important to this particular vineyard, so we're going to say that if there are mealybugs and Argentine or gray ants present, but sparsely and in low numbers, then the reaction is to release anagyrus wasps, to treat for ants, and to use pheromone disruptions and monitor. If the mealybugs and the Argentine or gray ants are present in moderate to high numbers on the trunk and the leaves, then this reaction is to treat with Movento, treat for ants, and monitor populations, including the parasites including the parasitized mealybugs. So then you want to also talk about the timing of your treatments. And this will be very specific to whatever your particular operation is doing. So treatments are timed to provide maximum levels of control, for example, at the more vulnerable life stages of the pest, and in a proactive manner to prevent a high population rather than attempt to decrease a large damaging pest population once it has grown out of control. As harvest approaches, moderate pest levels are more tolerated than earlier in the season. Earlier ripening varieties can sometimes avoid treatment. And then this is just something that was in the companion information. Old Vine Zin ripens later, and this needs to be more closely monitored and treated earlier. So kind of you can give some reasons as to your timing decisions, and then it can be, here it was a little more broad, right? So then this is not required, but this could be helpful since you're doing a plan anyways. To just have a history of the insects and pests in that vineyard block by year, and just keep it simple as to high, low, moderate. So here we're just looking at mites, leafhoppers, and vine mealybug, and then just saying over the years, was it high, low, or moderate, and then what were the control measures at the bottom. And then, of course, you have your plan review and update schedule. So it says this plan will be reviewed on an annual basis in February. So when, how often, and then you write in your review date and then your signatures. And then I've seen some plans like Lee's that have some questions at this part. So Lee, did you want to, is it easy to find? So at the end, during this review, you might want to just have some general questions that you don't actually have to have answers to, but questions that make the people during that plan review process think. So,
So questions on the plan. Oh, okay. Yeah, so you could have some questions, you know, did it work? Do I want to change my thresholds? You could say, well, I started with 30 leaf hoppers per leaf, and by the time I got to harvest the previous year, there was way too much damage, so I need to change my threshold. You want to be able to have a section where you address any concerns. Maybe it's safety concerns. Maybe it's I don't want to use that material because it's a danger material, and I have a worker safety concern that I would rather avoid. So there are things like that to where the annual review process, you can list a couple of the questions, things that you may want to consider, keep it general, but it's addressed.
Awesome. So at this point, if you have any questions on Lodi Rules 6.1, the Insect and Mite Pest Management Plan, there is a tab on the right of your computer screen probably in that little go-to webinar box that says questions. And feel free to type in a question, and then we will read that to everyone and answer it. And you will have more time for questions at the end as well.
So the next one is the scouting. Is that?
So the next thing we're going to go over is just Chapter 6 in general asks you to have monitoring records. And so what do these monitoring records look like? We're going to show you that. So you definitely want to work closely with your PCA or your Vineyard Scout to get the records in an organized, easy-to-use format that works for you and that works with your auditor for verification purposes. So what monitoring records are needed for the Lodi Rules verifications if you want to get the full amount of points? So you need to have monitoring records for any insects and mites that are listed in your Insect and Mite Pest Management Plan, and that's at least leafhoppers and mites. Monitoring records also need to be for powdery mildew, weeds, and vertebrates. And we listed which Lodi Rules standard those things go with. So, of course, it's okay to include extra columns for things like rots and viruses. A lot of monitoring records, I don't think I've seen any monitoring records that don't have extra columns for things, so that's fine. Be sure that you explain your scoring or your rating system, including any symbols or abbreviations that you might use. Even if you're leaving a box blank, explain what that blank means. If that blank means that at that time, that was not, at that time, you did not need to scout for that particular insect or disease pressure issue, then you need to say that somewhere. So for example, if you are using low, moderate, high, be sure to repeat those explanations from your plan into a footnote in your monitoring records that are submitted for verification. So in other words, what does that low mean? And you want to say what it means in numbers or percentages. So maybe that low means less than 3 out of 10 vines are affected. And don't worry, we're going to show you this example. And so you really want to pretend that a stranger is reading through your table and that you want to give them everything they need for it to make sense. Okay, so here's just an easy example. So this is the Luna Vineyard Block A. It's scouted every 7 days from April through harvest. So you have your date column and you write out your dates, and then you have weeds, Pacific spider mites, leafhoppers, both adults and nymphs, vine mealybug, sharpshooter, powdery mildew, leaf roll virus, and gophers. So for April 3rd, the weeds 10%. So what does 10% mean? We go to the footnote. Any percentage score indicates the estimated vineyard block percentage affected. Okay, that makes sense. Pacific spider mite, 0%. Leafhopper, adult A, and nymph N. Notice that we explained A means adult and N means nymph right here. So A 0, N 0. And then down here, did we explain what that 0 means? Yes, we did. For the leafhoppers, the score is an average per leaf of 10 randomly selected healthy leaves. Vine mealybug, 0 out of 15. What does that mean? For the vine mealybugs and sharpshooters, the score is the number of vines where mealybugs or sharpshooters are present out of 15 randomly selected vines. So we'll move over to powdery mildew, 0%. We already explained what percentage meant. Leaf roll virus has a dash. Well, what does a dash mean? Let's go down here and make sure that we have that. Any block with a dash indicates that the timing is not ideal for the pathogen or its symptoms to appear. And then over here, gophers, those are our vertebrates. We have 2 out of 10. What does that mean? For gophers, the score is the number of areas where gopher holes can be spotted out of 10 random spots in the block. So there's one simple way, and then I'll let Lee talk about how he does his monitoring sheet, and I think that I can pull up the example for you.
So we do a weekly monitoring sheet, and this is a way that's worked for us. You could come up with any version of this. So since we're in the vineyard, we want to look at other things so that we have them in our notes for coming years. You know, I chose to put on there, do we need to be out there disking or mowing? And it's just a yes or no. Put other things on there aside from what we already listed. Does the vineyard need to be trimmed? So I can be thinking ahead, so I can utilize this document thinking ahead for some of our other practices in the vineyard. There are others that you work with that your pest control advisor, if they're the person that's actively doing the monitoring, they may be able to provide you with a document because they're out there doing this. And I have that option with our pest control advisor. This is something that I'm starting to do on our own, so I wanted to give you an example of what may work for you. If you have a small vineyard or you do your own recommendations, then you don't need necessarily the help of a pest control advisor that uses a software. You could come up with a monitoring format of your own that fits your needs. The main thing you want to focus on here, again, is whatever you select. If you're doing this weekly, if you're doing it bi-monthly, every 2 weeks, whatever standard that you set and points that you've taken during your self-assessment, you want it to show here. And so keep that in mind when you're doing your monitoring. You want to be reasonable, and you want to be something that you can achieve. If you put weekly, maybe that's not feasible. Maybe every 2 weeks. And so don't try to score, especially in your initial year, maximum points. Keep in mind that we don't need all of the points that are out there in order to pass. Keep in mind, everyone wants to achieve. We all want to score 90 or 100 or whatever the number is. But keep that in mind. Don't make it so difficult for yourself that you think that you have to get maximum points. Sometimes on certain standards you might get 2 out of 4 or even 1 out of 4. Does it really make sense for you to go do an extra sampling if it's a lab sample? Maybe you don't have the time allotment. And there are things like that that you may choose to not do, or that could be a goal going forward that in future years you want to you want to go ahead and do that sample. So that could be when you get into the other chapters. That could be in reference to nutrient sampling. Petioles, to get maximum points, you have to do that twice per year. Well, you may choose to do it every once a year or even every other year. So don't feel like you have to get maximum points. Try to make this an easier, more enjoyable process.
Those are great tips. So something else, if you have not, I'm 100% sure that all of you already have some sort of monitoring records, but if you're creating new documents, this comment section at the bottom I think is really key to have on any kind of monitoring sheet. It just super helpful. Okay, so we're going to keep moving along, and if you have any questions on monitoring sheets, go ahead and type those in now. And again, we will have more time at the end if you don't have time to type in your questions right this second. Okay, so we don't see any questions, so we'll move on to 6.11, the Powdery Mildew Management Plan. This one reads, the farming operation has a written and implemented powdery mildew management plan which contains the following components: goals, preventative measures, varietal susceptibility, canopy characteristics, treatment decision factors, treatment measures, and a plan review and update schedule. So if I'm a new grower, I'm starting from scratch to write my powdery mildew management plan. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my heading at the top. Then I'm going to copy all of these terms, and I'm going to just copy and paste them as headings into my plan. And that's exactly what I did last night when I was making this example for you. So here we go. So again, at the top, you say when it was written, when it was last updated. Here's our goals. We seek to proactively manage powdery mildew risk by early season detection and treatment, as well as canopy management for maximum airflow, shoot thinning, leaf pulling, crop thinning, jib sprays where needed, depending on the grape variety and vigor. Fungicides with different modes of action are rotated along with sulfur to reduce the potential for resistance to develop in the pathogen population. Preventative measures. So a lot of key strategies for pest management, of course, is prevention. So these are really important. Starting in April, the vineyard is monitored for powdery mildew and the weather is closely watched. Daily emails from Western Weather. Powdery mildew online forecasting tools are used as needed. Regular sulfur treatments have historically been sufficient in controlling powdery mildew, although with this year being so wet, we will have to be extra watchful for pathogen development. All vineyards are on a drip irrigation system, which minimizes pathogen spread.
So one of the other goals that we list in ours is the Doug Gubler model, and so that may be something, if you utilize it, that you'd want to list there. I also have notes in here depending on varietal susceptibility, the history of the block. You have some of this knowledge that is going to dictate how frequent your treatments will be, what materials you use. I have notes in here as our goals are to maximize our spray coverage, because if we don't maximize coverage, and so then we're not going to get as an effective treatment. So those are different goals than she does. So keep in mind, you can make this whatever your goals. You could have a number of things. You could have just kind of what you do in your normal process. I watch the weather. I use the Gubler model. I treat after rainfall event because it's washed off my sulfur dust. So just general things like that. And again, these can be bullet points. They could be in sentence form. They could be just bullet points or paragraph, whatever you're most comfortable with.
Exactly. And then they do want you to mention varietal susceptibility in your plan too. So I found this chart, which was taken from a British Columbia powdery mildew guidance document, and I just included it here. You wouldn't copy this chart into your plan, but you can use it to see what varieties that you might be growing to see their susceptibility. So here's the table for you to use, and then here's the actual kind of wording down here that you would say. So just as simple as this. This vineyard is planted to Cabernet Sauvignon, which is susceptible to powdery mildew, and Merlot, which is somewhat susceptible to it. Canopy characteristics. The canopy is managed for maximum airflow by employing shoot thinning, leaf pulling, crop thinning when needed, jib sprays, Cabernet only, and a trellis design which opens the canopy. And then, of course, you would want to be a little more specific on what type of trellis system you are using.
Yeah, and so our treatments, we list things such as rotating different fungicide materials, and we also list things of using fungicides that are allowed by your winery customers. And we have a specific in there about when your treatment cutoff will be. So you could have in there, we're not going to treat after raison or at a certain brick level. So there's things like that to where you kind of lay out what your treatment measures are going to be.
Yep, and so that's this next paragraph, treatment decision factors and measures. So here's a few more examples following these. Fungicides are applied when the new shoot growth, which is highly vulnerable, is between 2 to 4 inches long and at regular intervals based on disease pressure levels as determined by risk models and weather conditions. When mildew is present in greater than 30% of the vineyard, eradicant and or systemic fungicides are considered. Effectiveness of treatments is noted on an annual basis, including whether or not the mildew pressure decreased, remained the same, or increased, and the total cost of the treatments is also calculated. So, let's look at this whole powdery mildew plan is just one page. So again, these plans don't have to be super long. And then you have your review and update schedule at the bottom.
So it's a little bit different because your threshold with powdery mildew, it's more of a preventative. But you could also list things in there like, this is my prevention program, I'm going to use sulfur dust. And if I were to find an issue where I do have a powdery mildew hot spot, then I'm going to use an eradicant, or I'm going to use a systemic fungicide. So you can keep things general, but you can also elaborate if you'd like to on what type of treatments depending on what you're seeing in the vineyard.
Exactly. Okay, so if there's any questions, you can type those in now, and we can answer them now or at the end. And if there are no questions, we'll keep moving along. So we've got, it looks like there's no questions. We've got Lodi Rules Standard 6.17, Soil-Borne Pest Management Plan. The farming operation has a written and implemented soil-borne pest management plan focusing on nematodes and phylloxera, which contains the following components: management goals, a post-planting soil sampling program, site-specific control measures, and a plan review and update schedule. So here's an example. Again, you have the standard at the top, so it's easy to find, when it was written, when it was updated, and we begin with our goals. To efficiently reduce soil-borne pests to a manageable level while maintaining balanced, microbially active and nutrient-available soils. In addition to nematodes and phylloxera, we look out for atypical soil pathogens such as Phytophthora, which may be an indication of a hard pan. So that's just something specific to this vineyard. Soil sampling program. Before planting, soil samples were taken and analyzed by a professional laboratory to determine varietal and rootstock choices. We believe that choosing the correct rootstock and variety for a given soil type is an important step in defending the grapevines against soil-borne and other pests. So maybe you just purchased the vineyard and you don't know what happened before planting. That's okay. You would just start with after planting. So after planting, soils are sampled for nutrients and pests, phylloxera, nematodes, and Phytophthora every 3 years or as recommended by our PCA. If any soil-borne pathogens are present, appropriate actions will be taken. So far, soil-borne pathogens have not been an issue in the 5-year-old vineyard. And so is that pretty much what you have in yours too, Keith?
Yeah, on all the plans, just keep in mind, set a few goals, your strategy, how you're going to monitor it, and then your treatment measures. So if you have that kind of same hierarchy, your treatment measures in this will be, okay, if you do have a certain number or it's a presence absence of a certain nematode that you're concerned with, well, how are you going to mitigate that? Are you going to, you can't soil fumigate because the vineyard's already planted in this case, and so you say, well, I may use an insecticide through the drip system, or I may spray Movento. So keep it general again, and you want to have those different things. What are going to be your treatment strategies should you need to? Another one that we have in here is talking about, depending on the age of the vineyard, the reality that you may need to consider replanting the vineyard. And so if you were to see a certain nematode problem and it gets to a damaging level to where it's an economic decision, you could have a note in there that regarding that. You can talk about cover crops. That's another thing that we list in ours. There are certain cover crops that can be planted that will they're known as resistant cover crops to nematode activity, and so things like mustards and those type that you can work with your PCA. So those are other mitigation or treatment measures that people can use. They're more passive, but they would be considered a treatment measure as opposed to an insecticide or a nematicide that you may run through your drip system.
Right. One of the main points of the Lodi Rules program is that we like to use integrated pest management. So you always think about what are you doing that's, what are your chemical means of control, your cultural means of control, etc. So in this example, our site-specific control measures are just very general. So vine health and balance is maintained in order to provide a strong defense against soil-borne pests. Drip irrigation is applied such that it never pools in any areas of the vineyard, and the soils are well drained. Cover crops, which add organic matter back to the soil, are used year-round. And then you have your plan review and update schedule. So that was our last management plan that we're reviewing this morning. I know this morning is our longest webinar yet. We had a lot to cover. The next webinar, which is our final one, is going to be held on Wednesday, April 26th from 1 to 2 p.m. We have Steve Kwasnick coming over for that, and we're going to go over the weed management plan, the vertebrate management plan, and the spray dust drift management plan. So if you want to register for that session, you can use the email that you got about the webinars before, the link there, and the link is also here, this handout, which I believe you can download from the GoToWebinar, but you can also get it on our lodigrowers.com website. So if you still need to attend a Sustainable Vision workshop, please be sure to email me today so that we can get you on that list. We are talking to Kent Reeves, who hosts those vision workshops, and trying to come up with a way, a location and a date for the next one, because we've actually got people from all over who need to attend one. So we're trying to figure that out for you. And are there any final questions for Lee and I about any of these management plans or the monitoring records that we covered today? We'll hang out on this webinar for the next 5 minutes. So if you have any questions, just type them in and then you can send them to us and we will get those answered. Thank you so much for your attention. And Lee, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate you guys and all that you do for sustainable viticulture.
I wanted to make a comment on, some of you may be still working on your self-assessments, and I'd be happy to share with you. You can contact Stephanie and can give you a format that I use that helps me. I have created a spreadsheet that helps me when I do my self-assessment from year to year. And what it does is it has each standard listed, and then I have on the side column I have which letter that is. And so if it's a yes or no, or if it's A means yes or B means no, C, whatever you're trying to choose. So that's been helpful to me year over year, because once you do your self-assessment, if you're not aware, you can clone the previous year, and that's often what I do is I'll clone the previous year, and then I'll go through, and there may be a number of items that will change from one year to the next. So you want to make this as easy of a process as you can. So if you think that would be helpful, I can kind of show you what I've done, and we can email that to you. It's a format that's been helpful for me. So these are little tricks that I've learned along the way, and again, we want to make this as seamless as possible. And the self-assessment is one part that can be cumbersome, and having to go line by line, and if you have multiple management units, and so copying those from each other once you've gone through the process has been helpful for me.
Awesome, thank you. If camera's off.